I as BJP have won in a lot of constituencies whose physical area is huge. Out here, there's Jaisalmer, right? Huge in terms of area. A bunch of other places in Rajasthan, large in terms of area, large areas in Madhya Pradesh. So my performance looks fantastic because I'm covering a lot of physical area. Out here, Congress won in a few places in Mumbai, few places in Delhi, right? Tiny, you can't even see them. But each of those counts for as much as Jaisalmer does. Now we have a natural distortion with this kind of a map. This kind of a map is called a choropleth. And there are a number of alternatives, ways of removing this kind of a distortion. What if I showed the same map like this, in which each of these circles represents a constituency. The constituencies are positioned at exactly the same location as where they're supposed to be. The size of the circle is another dimension that I have to play with. In this particular case, I've chosen it to be based on the number of voters. And these are like balloons that push each other so that they don't overlap. So at a glance, I still see the same pattern, and now it's much easier to spot that BJP and Congress roughly got the same number of votes. There isn't all that much of a difference between them, which was in fact what happened. The difference was only about 7 constituencies between the two. Cartograms are a pretty powerful technique, and since we are on the topic of elections, let me show you a few others. This is the state of Tamil Nadu's winning parties. I'll show you an animated version of it that would be more interesting. So what I'm going to do is explore the Tamil Nadu elections in terms of margins. See, earlier I said that we could choose any dimension for the size, and I showed you the size based on the number of voters. But what if we said the size is based on the winner's margin? So now I can see not just the party in terms of number of people that have voted for it, but in terms of how strong a victory that it had. So in 1967, the Maroons are DMK out here, okay, Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam. In 1971, that's what the pattern looks like. Clearly DMK is dominating. In 1977, however, we have ADMK taking over. That's a party in green with a reasonably good majority. We have ADMK continuing to stay in power. The next time, now DMK almost fades out, barring a few spots out here, and it's the dark green, which is Congress, which is popping in and capturing all of those places. The next year is a washout. DMK just completely rules the elections. On the other hand, ADMK comes back with an even more resounding victory. This was Jayalalitha's first big, massive win, where DMK is present in 1 constituency, 2 constituencies. The rumor goes that, sorry, I'm not going to go into the rumors. The next year, DMK comes back in strength. ADMK comes back, but with not as strong a success. DMK comes back. ADMK comes back. It's like, if you want to see anti-incumbency in action, this is where you see it in Tamil Nadu. Like, there is barely any seat that stays with a party right through. But it's not just the number of seats. Here is a view where I'm looking at the number of candidates. How many candidates are coming in and contesting in the elections, right? So, for example, out here in the Chennai region, I have 5 candidates. And this is in 1967. 5 candidates, 3 candidates, and so on. The next year, there are about the same number of candidates. Now, 1977 elections, people start getting more active, and they start talking about, okay, I should be contesting the elections. 1980, however, it comes down. See, 1977, we had 190 candidates. 1980, however, we have only about 1,000 candidates. So the overall interest in standing for elections has come down in Tamil Nadu. 1984, however, it pops up to 1,500. So there is an increase, but the bulk of it is because of one constituency, Maduranthagam. And in Maduranthagam, we have as many as 90 candidates standing in one election. Obviously, it will be mostly independents, and you can see that these are all the independents that are standing for elections, and there are not many votes. I mean, this person, Yesumuthu, whatever, has gotten 12 votes, probably his family and friends. Right? In 1989, however, there is renewed interest, as many as 3,000 candidates, and this is fairly uniformly spread. It's not just one place that's gotten their interest. Oh, now I have 2 constituencies where there are 264 candidates and 249 candidates respectively standing. Okay, Pallipet and Aravakurichi. Massive. I mean, who would think that 200 odd people would come and stand in election? But all of this pales in comparison to Modakuruchi, where 1,033 candidates decided to stand for elections in one constituency. Right. Now, here's the list. Okay, so let's go to some of these. So there is Muthusami K, Muthusami N again, Muthusami P, Nallasamy N, Nallasamy P, Palanisamy C, Palanisamy C, Palanisamy C, Palanisamy D, Palanisamy K. I mean, what? This could be a telephone directory. Now, what's weirder is that, see, all of these people have just gotten one vote. They've just voted for themselves. What's even more bizarre is there are a whole bunch of candidates who didn't even vote for themselves. They've gotten 0 votes. 88 candidates. Now, I don't know what they were doing in this election. This is perhaps the most bizarre election in the history, not perhaps, it is the most, in my opinion, bizarre election in the history of assembly elections in India. But then things start going back to normal. 2001, things were fine. There's a renewed interest in 2006. The rest of the elections were fine, but I'm very, very curious to see what exactly happened in that particular election. See, we are not presenting anything more than raw data here. We are not even taking averages here. We're just saying in this particular place, this person won in this particular time. Where visualizations help is it serves as a data discovery mechanism in this particular case. We are not talking about any sophisticated analysis or representation. It serves to tell a story, and that's a simple benefit. This also helps when you're dealing with aggregates. For example, if I did want to take this at a higher level, this, for example, is the results of every single assembly elections that happened in India. So starting from 1951 on the horizontal axis all the way down to 2014, who were the people, which were the parties that won? So for example, in Andhra Pradesh, it started off with the Congress for several elections until in the middle, TDP came in and took over. Then Congress stepped back, TDP again for a couple of terms. Whereas in Arunachal Pradesh, it's but for the one term that Janata National Party had when Arunachal Pradesh was formed, it's been Congress all the way through. In Karnataka, we've had Congress leading again, with Janata National Party for 2 terms, and then it's been a flip-flop across a variety of parties. Now, India, when you think about it, is for all practical purposes a one-party state. You don't really have any other party coming close to Indian National Congress in terms of wins. BJP is the next, but it's a relatively recent phenomenon, only in a relatively few states. They have never captured power in any place outside of these states, and they haven't managed to retain power in a large number of them either. Well, actually, maybe a reasonable number of them. CPM, 3 states, consistent wins, but now never moved out of that. JNP, 1 slice. They won and they vanished. ADMK, again, 2 states, and that's it. The other is Pondicherry, incidentally, which probably doesn't even count. DMK, again, JD, a viable alternative, but relatively for a short period. So for all practical purposes, India has one party, at least from an assembly election perspective. And that becomes a whole lot clearer when you look at something like this. We covered politics for a variety of organizations, Vijay Karnataka being the Kannada newspaper being one of them. And they were featuring some full page spreads, which were pretty interesting. They said, we'd like to show what is happening in terms of performance of the various politicians at a glance. Can people see how their party has performed, how their candidate has performed, and can we see this in aggregate? One of these visualizations was to show the wealth of candidates. So for example, can we look at how much wealth each of the politicians have? And this is a zoomed in version of one such. It's in Kannada, I'm afraid. I can't read it either, but I do remember some of the numbers there. So the blues are Congress politicians, the oranges are BJP politicians, the greens are Janata Dal, and the yellows are independent. So you can clearly see that there's not that much money in being an independent candidate. But you can also see that there is one candidate who probably has more money than all of BJP put together from candidate's perspective, declared wealth. Oh, that's Ravi Krishna for those who know. He's the son of Layout Krishnappa, who is this person. I mean, Layout Krishnappa is his nickname, apparently. And this is just the declared wealth of these politicians. But what can they buy with it? Right? So if you take Ravi Krishna, if you stack all of his wealth in 1,000 rupee notes, that would cover the Vidhan Sauda. Just fill it. See, 1,000 rupee notes are actually pretty dense. You'd think that it would, say 1 crore would be a lot, right? 1 crore is pretty small. It is, I can fit that in my bag in 1,000 rupee notes. A suitcase is about 10 crores. A king size bed is about 100 crores. So, in 1,000 rupee notes, I just need 7 king size beds. I can stack about 1,500 crores in that corner out there. It doesn't take much to carry a lot of money, we later on realized. We also found that gold was pretty portable as well. The lady there, I forget her name, Anita Kumarswamy, I think. So she has enough gold, she can buy enough gold to equal twice her weight. So we said, let's make 2 statues of her and put them next to her. The trouble is gold is incredibly dense. Right? Twice her weight in gold is about this much volume of gold, that's it. So again, to pack several thousands of crores of wealth in gold, you just put it in that corner, you'd be able to comfortably get it out there. Um, we also looked at how these politicians were performing from an attendance perspective. So for each of the politicians, and they are shown as one little row out here, so each of these stripes is one politician. They are colored based, group based on the parties, all the BJP MLAs versus the Congress MLAs versus the independents and JD, colored based on their attendance level, so 0 to 50%, 50 to 75%. The blacks are the MPs who've covered about, their attendance is technically marked as, not MPs, ministers, whose attendance is not marked, so you assume that it's 100%. But there are a few that are attending parliament fairly regularly, the assembly fairly regularly, those that are below 50% effectively have a fail mark. And you get to see how the parliament or the assembly is performing at one shot. But this need not be restricted to pure numbers either. What if we looked at the questions that they are asking and see what is it that each party is really interested in? Can I take all of the topics that they are asking questions on, group that by each of these parties and see where the focus is? For example, BJP is the only party that ever asked questions related to fisheries and inland water transport. No one else was asking any questions about this. Janata Dal was primarily the key party in asking questions around cooperatives. Nobody else was particularly looking at those. Congress was the one that was mainly focusing on primary and secondary education. Both Congress and Janata Dal were interested in revenue-related questions, of which there were many, but BJP couldn't care less about the revenue-related questions, probably because they were in power and the answers would be rather difficult. Whereas they were quite interested in, well, at least partially more interested in urban development. Everybody was interested in urban development. Everybody was interested in minor irrigation and so on. In a sense, you get a sense of what the party's manifesto is without having to read the manifesto. You get their behavioral manifesto. It's not about what they said they would say, but what they are in fact acting on that you are inferring from this, and can start looking at how that compares with what they said they would. But apart from this, you can break it up in a variety of other ways. This, for example, is a breakup based on the age. So what are young MLAs interested in? What are old MLAs interested in? So the ones on the left are questions asked, topics that are asked mostly by young MLAs, and right on the left extreme is agriculture. All the young MLAs are asking lots of questions about agriculture, none of the old MLAs are, whereas all the old MLAs are asking questions about water resources and none of the young MLAs are. Why? I don't know. The most cynical explanation that I've heard about it is that the young MLAs have bought a lot of agricultural land and are quite interested in their development. Whereas if you take the UPA government's first and second term and start contrasting this, so in the parliament, what were the kinds of bills that were passed? So on the left are the topics that cover the bills in the UPA's first term, on the right are those that cover the second term, and in between are those that came roughly equally. The size, of course, is how often there was a bill that related to that particular topic. There were a lot of agreements, international agreements, during the UPA's first term, probably all the ministers going on their foreign tours and signing lots of agreements, but that completely stopped in the second term. In the second term, this focus almost exclusively seems to be on laning, on section in NHDP, the National Highway Development Policy, on infrastructure effectively. So if I were to answer the question, what is the one thing that differentiates the UPA's first term versus the second term? It is a decreased focus on international agreements and an increased focus on infrastructure, specifically on the highways side. You can also see that the word center is a lot more to the left. So all decisions related to the center, for example, were more popular during the first term, more inward focus perhaps. Decisions related to the state were a lot more during the second term, and you can get, I guess you can see that the balance of power is shifting between the first term and the second term, more towards the supporting parties, the state majorities. Given that we are talking about text analysis, we said, look, let's take the largest epic in the world. Let's take the Mahabharata and see what we can do with it. So can we, for example, see who the characters are, where they're mentioned, and so on. This is a representation where we took the epic and broke it down into little boxes. Each of these boxes represents one parva. So the first parva, the second parva, and there are 18 such parvas within which there are various sections. So this is the first section, second section, third section, and so on. The length of the box represents the number of words in that particular section. So you have an overall map of the Mahabharata, and we extracted from this the characters and places and so on. So here's a list of the top 50, 60 characters. So if you want to see where Yudhishthira is mentioned, that's all of the places where he's mentioned. So a lot of talk about Yudhishthira out here, a lot less talk about him here. But you can see that, and clicking on it, you can go to the actual text and see where Yudhishthira is mentioned. But you can see that the book is pretty much covering Yudhishthira right across. Whereas there are some characters, let's take an example, Nala, who's mentioned in just one tiny spot. So I can see that there is a story about Nala, but no further mention of him. So without knowing anything about the epic, I can say that there is a character who is relevant in one particular section, and nothing else needs to be said about this particular person anywhere else. If I take another character, let's say I'm going to pick Damayanti out here. Now Damayanti is appearing in exactly the same spots as Nala is. So without again knowing anything about the epic, I can conclude that these are two characters who are related. and are part of the same story, in contrast with Nala and let's say Drupada, who is occurring in completely different spaces. So with this, I have effectively a proximity metric. I can see that Nala and Damayanti are close together, whereas Nala and Drupada are not close together. Can we plot this? What we have here is a network diagram where each of these characters are clustered around based on the distances between them. So two characters like Nala and Damayanti would come close together, whereas two characters like Nala and Drupada would go far away from each other because they are not quite related. And what this gives you is a structure of the key characters of the epic. I've just taken the top 30 characters out here. So you can see that Yudhishthira is right in the middle, connected to everybody, Krishna is right in the middle, connected to everybody, Arjuna is out there, connected to everybody, and so on. Whereas Parva is relatively peripheral, Gandhari is relatively peripheral, Vyasa is relatively peripheral. In fact, Narada is connected only to two characters, Vyasa and Krishna. Those are the only two people that he speaks to. Let's ask the question now. Which Pandava was Draupadi the closest to? Who she mentioned the most with? So here's Draupadi. She's mentioned a lot with Sahadeva, with Nakula, with Bhima, with Yudhishthira. All of them are reasonably close. But it's interesting that Arjuna is the furthest away from Draupadi, which is bizarre. So we said we have to have gotten something wrong. So we said, let's redo this metric. Instead of looking at whether they are mentioned together in the same section, let's look at how many words separate them. Let's look at how many characters separate them. Let's look at whether they are mentioned first, whether mentioned second. Whole series of other metrics, every single way Draupadi was far away from Arjuna. We said, okay, text analysis does not work, or at least we are not good at it and we should not do anything about it. We just showed it around to a few people asking for opinions. And one lady, an investment banker from Pune, she said, look, have you heard of this Marathi play, which is about the Mahabharata from Draupadi's point of view, which incidentally was copied from a Bengali play of the same theme. The theme is that while Arjuna was Draupadi's favorite, there is no mention of Draupadi being Arjuna's favorite. He had enough people to command his attention. In fact, the bulk of the time when they were in the forest, he went around making alliances, mostly by marrying people. So in fact, you do find that, and the theme of the play was about how Draupadi felt completely ignored by Arjuna. What we see here is Draupadi is mentioned more often with all of the other Pandavas, and Arjuna does have enough people to pull away his attention even among the major characters out here. A structure of an epic like this could be revealed, but let's start applying the same thing to Indian law, corporate law for example. What other topics that are tightly connected to each other, or social networks for that matter, and see what they look like. Let's start with social networks since we are talking about it. What I have here is, let me just reload this, an accelerated real-time playback of the tweets recorded at an event called JSFU as of October. Each of these circles coming in is one tweet, and the size of the circle, size isn't important. The color of the circle represents the kind of tweet that it is. So the circles that are in red are retweets. The circles that are in black are original tweets. The ones that are in blue, there aren't that many of those. The ones that are in blue, they are replies to existing tweets. So this tweet, for example, is a reply to this particular one. And as time passes, there are more replies. So here, let's take the question. So here's a tweet where Shamir C is saying, I'm kind of interested to know how and where you use backbone.js. A bunch of people have responded to that. Here's another tweet where, let's see what that is. Okay, can't see that one. Can I see that one? Okay, K. Sriram making a tweet, whatever. Now, what I've got here is the structure of the tweets at that conference. And you'll notice that there aren't that many replies. There are people making tweets. There are people making retweets. There aren't many conversations happening in Twitter. And that is the nature of the vast majority of tweets that I'm seeing in conferences. If you want another example, here's one called PyCon India, where again, people were tweeting independently. There aren't that many retweets out here, just people tweeting independently, but you'll find that there aren't many conversations happening in the Twitter universe. It's not quite a public conversation forum as much as it is a public broadcasting forum, and I say things and people don't quite get back to me. But what we can do with this kind of data is start analyzing the structures and relationships. So one kind of structure that we were looking at was in a different social network called GitHub. GitHub is like a social network for geeks, where it's sort of like Facebook, except instead of sharing photos, you share programs, open source programs. This is a social network of Bangalore. All of the people in Bangalore on GitHub. The size of each of these circles is based on the number of followers that they have. So the larger the circle, the more influential the person is. And the color is based on the programming language that they program in. So blues are the JavaScript guys, Ruby in orange, green in Java, and so on. Now you'll see that Bangalore is a reasonably connected network. That is, if you know one person, you can quickly traverse and find most of the other people by just staying within the network. And you will find that in the behavior of Bangalore as well. Whereas in contrast, a place like Hyderabad is not quite as connected. A place like Delhi is not quite as connected. Enough programmers, but not as strong a connection. And the few connections that you find are actually corporate networks, meaning people working in the same company that are building their applications in an open source platform and therefore connected out there. Let's take Bangalore again. Now, one other curious thing that we noticed about Bangalore was that there is out here one person who seems to be connecting the entire network but doesn't have followers. So this person popped into the Bangalore network about 6 months ago. His name is Jagdish Singh. Click and you'll be able to see Jagdish Singh's profile if my network connection is fast enough. So that's Jagdish Singh. I don't know if he's around, sorry if you are. But Jagdish has popped into the network and decided to follow most of the people in Bangalore, and inadvertently is effectively a strong unifying factor in the social network of Bangalore. So if you know Jagdish, you can quickly reach out to practically all of the open source geeks out here. Singapore is probably the only other city that has this kind of a network. So if I take the network of Singapore and see what that social network looks like, it's even denser in some cases than Bangalore is, though the relative proportion is somewhat smaller. However, if you take the combination of these two, if I take Singapore and Bangalore and start connecting them, now instead of coloring it by language, I'm going to color it by city and make the gap a little smaller so you'll be able to see it easier. Now, you have all of the people in Bangalore in blue, all of the people in Singapore in orange, and these two, while they are clusters within themselves, there are very few people talking amongst each other. So if there were, let's say about a dozen people that are talking to each other, if I were to shoot them, then Bangalore and Singapore become completely disconnected as cities. Whereas, in contrast, if I were, instead of Bangalore and Singapore, take, let's say, Chennai and Bangalore, these two are much more tightly integrated cities. They have much more stronger connections, almost like embedded within each other. You will also find this of Mumbai and Pune, for example, a lot more tightly integrated, partly because of geography, but then you could argue that the distance between Chennai and Bangalore is about the same as the distance between Chennai and Singapore, but clearly geographic boundaries have their own issues. This could be applied to an organization. In fact, we did apply it to a consulting organization, found that the retail organization between the US and Europe were just not talking to each other. The email exchanges between them were like what you saw in Bangalore and Singapore. Whereas the banking organization between US and Europe were a lot more tightly integrated. And there's been a long running argument as to why the retail best practices were just not being applied in Europe, whereas for this organization, the banking best practices obviously were getting applied in this particular case. A similar structure could be applied to corporate directorship networks. For example, when we applied to the Tata Group, what we found was, what you will see is the Tata Group can be divided into two sets of companies. Out here, you have the companies in the Tata Group in blue and the